here in a dream. I'm just stuck here in a dream.
Welcome to episode 14 of the Guns and Yoga podcast. My name is Wendy Hummel. This week, we continue our first responder podcast series. During the month of June, I'll be releasing podcast episodes in which I talk with fellow first responder podcasters. Before launching my own podcast this past February, after years of thinking about it, I followed several law enforcement and other first responder related podcasts for years. As a newbie, I didn't know what to expect when I reached out to veteran podcasters like James Gearing of Behind the Shield, who I spoke with in episode 12, and this week's guest, Garrett TeSlaa. Not only is Garrett a host of a successful podcast, The Squad Room, in which he just celebrated his 6th year, he's an author, TEDx speaker, and a 16-year law enforcement veteran in an agency in Southern California. Garrett has worked in all areas of his agency, from patrol, gang investigations, internal affairs, community relations, and media relations. Garrett didn't necessarily plan a career in law enforcement, but tells us how he was called to it. At the time he applied at his agency, he had a successful career in the music industry, but knew that there was more. The Squad Room podcast was a byproduct of Garrett's background in the music industry and his own personal journey towards health. Garrett openly discusses in his podcast his struggles with sleep, poor nutrition, rotating shift, and how injuries impacted him physically, mentally, and emotionally. As he looked for ways to solve his own issues, he began to share what he learned with his colleagues and eventually widened his audience with the podcast. I really enjoyed speaking with Garrett. I love it when I get to talk with other cops who recognize how critical fitness, meditation, resilience, and mental health are in the world of policing today. If you enjoy this episode, please share it, give us a review, and if you'd like to be notified of future episodes and want to receive our future newsletter, you can subscribe on our Podbean website. Welcome to the show, Garrett. I really appreciate your time and willingness to be on the other side of the microphone today.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, first of all, before we get started, I want to take time to thank you for your service, not just to the community that you work in. You've been in law enforcement for, I think it's 16 years, but really to the larger scale law enforcement community. You've been doing your podcast for 6 years. Congratulations, by the way, on hitting that landmark.
Thank you. Yeah.
You consistently push out content on the Squad Room podcast that supports cops and really, in my opinion, all first responders and military and their families. You talk about wellness, leadership, resilience, just all the things, work-life balance, relationships. And even though you and I have never met, we're seeing each other here on this video that no one else will see, but I've been listening to your podcast for quite a while. And you have personally, really, truth be told, you gave me the kick in the pants that inspired me to start my own podcast.
Oh, that's awesome.
So thank you for that. And
that's great.
But yeah, just thank you for everything that you do. Just, personally for me, you've been a little bit of an inspiration and all the stuff that you do. And I'm sure that you are appreciated at your agency as well.
Wow. Can we just end the interview there? Because now I'm just full of warmth and open heart and like, holy cow, what a nice intro. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. It's true.
As much as I'm so glad to hear that you get something out of the show. I'm glad anytime anyone tells me that they get something out of the show or they get some value out of the show. I got a great message this morning from someone who said after 25 years of being a cop, this show makes him feel like he's not alone, or it's not just me. Like, holy cow, those are all amazing things. But for every one of those, I feel the same thing back with the listeners and the opportunity to talk to the people I talk to and have those conversations to explore some of these challenging things that we deal with. So I got to be selfish too and admit that I get as much out of it as everybody else. But what a kind introduction. Thank you.
Oh no, you're welcome. And it's all true. I mean, I didn't do it just to butter you up. All of that's just kind of a benefit.
Yeah, it works.
But it is true because and I can tell it comes across when I hear you and you listen to your podcasts as to why you're doing it. And I don't think you're being, I don't think it sounds wrong at all to say that you get something out of it, because anyone, and I'm sure you know this more than I do, anyone who you talk to in this in this arena or this space where they want to help first responders and support them in some way, everybody gets something out of it too.
Hmm. Yeah, it's very true. And I think, when I started, like you said, 6 years ago, it was my show, one other show that I was able to find called The Crossover Show way back then, and then a show about social media and policing. That was really about it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been awesome to see the space, the category grow with everybody taking their own approach at it, their own ideas. And as I always look at it, we're all kind of throwing our ideas into the ring to see what might help somebody. And it might be that one episode or that one conversation with someone you've never heard of that might just, turn that light bulb on for someone to help them start that first step on their path towards whatever type of healing or goal setting they need.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And really, like, it could just be the timing too. The timing, the message, the way it's being said. And that's kind of the whole reason why I wanted to start this, is just because you never know the impact or the ripple effect that something that you say or one of your guests says. And we're never going to know that unless someone tells us. But that's really what it comes down to. It's just making a difference for the people that we serve alongside with.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly right.
So I want to backtrack and just ask you, just from the beginning, you've been in this profession for 16 years, and by reading your bio, this is not what your intended or the career you started in was. So can you just maybe tell me a little bit about that, your experience with what your old career was, and then what made you transition into law enforcement?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in a very musical household. Where some young boys, teenage boys, dad expects them to go play baseball or football. My dad's expectation was that I was in the choir or in drama theater. My dad has a doctoral degree in choral music, so that kind of, and he was a music teacher, and my mom was a music teacher. So music was very involved in my house from early on. And so I grew up on the performing side of it, but realized that didn't appeal to me as much as I got into rock and roll music, or rock music. Rock and roll, it makes me sound so old. Rock music. I noticed like the guys in the suits with the all access pass standing off the side of the stage, and thought, who are those people? And learned more. Like, I want to go do that. So from like an early age, like 14 or 15, I was interning for record labels. I was trying to get my foot in the door with my local radio stations. I went to college basically based on how strong the radio signal was at the college radio station there, so that I could potentially have the largest audience that I could possibly have, because I thought maybe I wanted to be a DJ. And then navigated my way through a couple record label jobs, moved to New York City after college, worked for a major label there, worked for Atlantic Records, which at the time was just blowing up. They had every major band that was on the radio in this is 99, 2000, somewhere in there. And I was starting my music career, and it never occurred to me that I was going to do anything else other than be in music on the business side of it. And got an offer to come to Los Angeles to help start a record label for a film studio. Moved to Los Angeles, again, spent about 5-6 years developing this label with some great people and working with bands and being on tour and trying to find the next big thing. And then in 2005, I took a hard right, as you might say, and walked away from it as I was about to make vice president of this major company. Walked away from it and started applying to law enforcement agencies, and was lucky enough eventually to find the right agency for me and get hired. And here I am 16 years later with the full commitment to law enforcement, which is yes, it's as exact opposite from the music industry as it sounds like it would be.
Yeah, it does. That is quite a pivot in career choices. And you're, excuse me, hearing that makes me think of, I'm kind of a quote geek. You'll just have to bear with me, but it reminds me of a quote, and I don't know if you're familiar with who Kelly McGonigal is. She wrote The Upside of Stress. And she has this quote in her TED talk that I love, and it says, "Chasing meaning is better than avoiding discomfort." And that sounds exactly like what you did. You went for something, even though it wasn't maybe necessarily the easy choice, especially since you were just getting ready to get promoted in your career field. You went for what had meaning for you. So
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was lacking it wasn't what I thought it would be in terms of
hmm
what it meant to me. It was cool to see music up close. It was cool to interact with creative musicians, but my purpose in it wasn't clear,
hmm
and I mean, I distinctly remember a night where I was standing on the Sunset Strip out, right there in Hollywood, uh, and was at a club watching a band like I did pretty much 5, 6 nights a week, and two LAPD cruisers, code 3, lights and sirens, come flying by at what looked like 120 miles an hour through, middle of traffic in Hollywood on a busy Friday or Saturday night. And I thought, who does that? like, that's insane. Like, I don't know what they're going to. Like, what are they going to? And I remember I'm with my buddies and we're having a good night out, but I just got wrapped up in this idea of like, where are they going? What are they doing? What are they going towards? They probably don't know. And even if they have we all know now from like, years on the job, like even if you think you know what you're going to, you're probably wrong. Right. But nonetheless, they're going as fast as they can towards someone else's worst moment. And I was like, who does that? And the more and more I thought about it and the more and more I looked into it and I started going to like citizens academies and stuff, I just got wrapped up in the idea of like, there's a lot of meaning in that job and there's a lot of service in that job. And I think that's what was really lacking in my life to that point was some sort of service. Because I think we all know now that, you, like we were saying, you get as much out of service as whoever you're giving that service to. And so I just said this, I can't do that. That's not me. I don't have that in me. I don't have that strength in me. I can't go through an academy. I'm just this, weakling music industry guy with, bleached blonde hair and goofy shirts. But I eventually got to the point where I was like, I have to try.
hmm
I have to at least try. And if I don't get in or they tell me you're not our type, like, okay, then I can at least, move on and know that I gave it a shot and find something of service and value and meaning to me. But luckily it's obviously worked out.
Yeah, obviously. And I'm curious, so after you decided to leave the music industry, and especially you're describing how you grew up, what did your family think?
Shocked. Because I have no family. I have a cousin in law enforcement out in the Midwest, but like, I would see him at family reunions
hmm
and whatnot. I never even talked to him about it. Otherwise, no law enforcement connections in my family whatsoever. And it was, my dad was he's already a bit of an anti-authoritarian kind of guy.
hmm
So for him, he was very shocked. Mom was, of course, very concerned. And I didn't have the courage to tell him for for a long time as I was going through the process.
Oh, wow.
Uh, but eventually, because I also wasn't sure of myself, I didn't know if I was going to actually commit to all this. But it just so happened that I was home visiting while I was in the closing stages of my background with the agency that eventually hired me. And I told them on the way to the airport, I was like, oh, by the way. And it's probably not the best way to drop something like that on them, so, but they've been very supportive ever since. They understand it. They've both been on ride-alongs with me. My dad loves to come out whenever I'm working and they come and visit. He'll ask me to actually like not take the night off when they come so that he can come along on a ride-along. So I think it's been great because it's really opened his eyes to what we deal with and the talents it takes to be good at the job. So no, they've been great. And I think in some ways we're happy to know that I was out of the volatility of the music industry, at least for job security, but I jumped right into the volatility of law enforcement
Yeah.
for the safety issues.
Well, and it took a lot of courage for you to do that, I have to say. I mean, going from something like that and not even feeling like you were prepared necessarily, but you just knew it was something that you wanted to do. And obviously it stuck because here you are, 16 years later, and you're still around.
Yeah, it stuck. I remember going to the academy and thinking, like, on the first day, thought, well, this is it. I'm going to quit by the end of the day. I can't handle this. That whole idea of, like, because I went to a very kind of old school paramilitary academy, lots of push-ups, lots of yelling, lots of screaming, lots of marching. So that was a whole new world for me, right? Like on Friday afternoon, I left my job, cleaned up my nice office in Beverly Hills. And on Monday morning, I'm having some former Marine Corps drill instructor yelling in my face and screaming at me with his campaign hat, hitting me, in the chest, like, oh, I'm not going to make it. But I thought, I'll get to the end of the day. And then I got to the end of the day, and then next day I had the same thought, well, I'll get to lunch, and then I got to lunch. And that happened numerous times throughout the academy, even when I was selected as class sergeant, which is sort of called different things in different academies, but like the class leader. And got selected for that. And they're like, and I thought to myself, like, why are they picking me? They have all these military veterans and guys in high ranking positions within the military who are just coming out of Afghanistan and Iraq, and they're picking me. Don't they know I'm going to quit next week? So yeah, it was a struggle. It was a struggle for me, but I got hurt. But again, it's kind of what I talk about now, of process oriented goals, and not looking at the big picture, but looking at what's the next right thing to do. And just looked at the next right thing, and all of a sudden you raise your head, and it's 16 years later.
Wow. And I think it means a lot too, when we're selected by our peers for something like that. It just shows that they obviously saw something in you that you may not have necessarily immediately noticed in yourself.
I've been thinking about that a lot recently, that idea, not specifically that event for me, but that idea that our peers or our friends or our coworkers recognize stuff in us that we don't see in ourselves, and how we need to be a bit more courageous about acknowledging that in everybody. Lots of partners, lots of veteran officers, and even new officers are walking around with this, terrifying feeling that they're not good enough to be here, or that they're not living up to the standard, or that they're the weak link. And, if we could all, one of my goals is if we can all open our compassion to each other. We talk so much about compassion for the public, and that's absolutely appropriate. But, what are we doing to really take a breath and acknowledge the work of the people to the left and right of us, and to just stop and be okay with it. Like, giving a compliment isn't weak, and there's so many, old school agencies out there still that think that you're doing your job, so that's why you get a paycheck, and that's why you're here. And accolades aside, that's stupid. Awards are stupid, or compliments are stupid. Like, no. Those are the things that people come to work and give their work meaning. We're in a spot right now where if we lose the meaning in the job, we're in trouble. But yeah, so that's a goal, is to help other officers acknowledge the gifts they're bringing to other people, and that what people see about you that you may not see about yourself.
Yeah, because I think we all bring something different to the table too, and we're all unique in our own way. And I think we need to do a better job. Couldn't agree more about pointing that out for each other. Because one thing, and I've talked about this before, I remember when I was in the academy a while ago. I won't say
20 years ago.
a long time ago. I remember like this lieutenant coming in and pretty much giving us this story. He was involved in a shooting, but his message was, the hardest part of this job isn't going to be the people you deal with or the calls you're dealing with. It's the people that you work with alongside of you. And I was like, nah, that's not true. Here I am, a rookie in the academy. And today I'm still like, why do we do this to each other? Why are we our own worst enemies? And we really need to change that. So you and I are on the same page with that. And that's something I try to talk about as much as I can. Like, hey, we need to lift each other up and support each other as much as we need to correct each other. And if something needs to be addressed when it comes to tactics or the way we work to call, that's one thing. But in general, we don't do a very good job.
Yeah, we emphasize fixing the bad stuff, which, I mean, we obviously need to do, and debriefing, and, supervisors. I've been a sergeant for 8 years, and we often get focused on the failures, which and I fully understand the importance of that, right? But we also need to acknowledge each officer's or deputy's wins, and those could be very, very small wins that they don't even see. You know, that goes all the way down to things like someone flags you down because they're lost in traffic, and you give them directions. Like, that's a win. Take that as a win, you know, and stack those wins up against what we all see as the losses every day. One of the other challenges you touched on it is we all think every other cop needs to be like us often, you know, or needs to have our values or have our skill set. But this job is so demanding in such a wide spectrum that it's impossible for us all to be the same. So rather than expect us all to be sort of cookie cutter, we need to learn how to use people's talents and their tools and to make them successful in different roles. I mean, this is a job where you have everything from a traffic officer who needs to know traffic to a school resource officer who needs to be half coach, half cop, half, you know, with young kids, all the way to the bigger spectrum of, you know, a SWAT guy who's tactically proficient with all the weapons, or an EOD tech, or all the different jobs that we do that require proficiency. And no one of us can be proficient in all of them. It's impossible, right? Mm-hmm. So we need the SWAT guy and the SRO to understand that they both bring value, and that my perspective is, thank goodness they're there, because I don't want either one of those. You know, I'm not good at either one of those, but I fill a different gap. And if we can acknowledge that, literally, this is a team. You know, if bad analogy, but a football team, not everybody plays quarterback, not everybody plays tight end. We all need to fill all of the spots to accomplish the goal. And we get so wrapped up in this idea that my dogma needs to be your dogma and your methods need to be the same as mine. And that's not true.
Yep. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's great because you are a supervisor, and in the agency I work in, the sergeants, obviously, I think it's probably the same for you, is you have such direct contact with the line level officers. And I think being able to talk to them about that day in and day out is so impactful, because I think sergeants have probably the most influence over their people, because you see them every day. And so I think that's great that you're sending that message to your people.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry to jump in. I'm just thinking of something like, you know, for actionable idea for sergeants to do this stuff with their people. Mm-hmm. We all have a briefing, right? We all start our shift with a briefing of some sort. Some agencies, it's very structured and short because you got to get out. Others, it's more of a conversation, and, you know, there's not really a time limit or whatever. But whatever you do, like, you have a briefing, but at the end of your shift, have a debriefing. You know, What did you all go through today? What did you experience? What are the calls you handled? You know, look at what you did for this old lady, or this couple whose car got broken into, or the school that got graffitied. You know, look at what you made them, look at how you made them feel. Look what you accomplished. Look at the goal you did. Look at the criminal you got off the street, and send people home with this idea that they accomplished something that day. And that's an easy thing for sergeants to do, to immediately create a meaning for their people.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. I'm glad you said that. You know, and it makes me think of something else too. I mean, we as human beings, we're so geared towards seeing the negative, like our negativity bias. And it's like it takes like 5 or 6 different good things to, you know, outweigh one bad. And so I think it's so important that we remind each other of that too. So you just made me think of that as well.
Yeah, cynicism is what we're taught in the academy, right? You're supposed to be suspicious of everybody. Everybody's potentially going to kill you. And that builds up, and it's reinforced in field training, and it's reinforced by your partners on the officer safety issues. And that cynicism is what keeps us alive. However, that leaks very quickly. It leaks into the other aspects of our life, into our relationships and everything else. And we become cynical about everything. And then it ironically ends up killing us. You know, we end up with heart attacks and heart disease and cancers and suicide because we have let the cynicism win out, because we only see those things now. And we got to start adding light to that conversation.
Well, and now that you've brought that stuff up, you're kind of leading me where I wanted to go anyway, which was what, and there may not just be one thing, but what made you get into just being interested in wellness? And I'm just using that term, it's very broad for yourself, for the people that you work with at your agency, and just in general. And that actually obviously led you to your podcast. So, how did that all start for you?
I was struggling like hard, and I couldn't put my finger on it necessarily, like what was going on or what was I dealing with. By this point, I was a sergeant, had been for a couple years, and was just, I mean, now in hindsight was like, I was the quintessential, like all the bad things that everyone warns you about happening, about gaining weight, bad nutrition on night shift, running through the 7-Eleven or the McDonald's instead of meal prepping. I was dealing with, I noticed that because we would rotate shifts. When I would go to night shift for 4 months, towards the end of that night shift, I was what I now understand to be straight depressed, and really having a hard time navigating through night shift. And I had young kids at home and was disconnected there. But I didn't know any of that necessarily. I just knew something was off, and like life was kind of a fog. And I was stationed at a substation of ours that was a solid commute away. And I started listening to podcasts and seeking out some of these answers and trying to learn about some of these things. And I found a couple, and that brought me to some books. And I started bringing this stuff to briefing. And I was known, or I am known, I think, for having probably the most eclectic kind of briefings that could be out there. Our structure is that, your briefing, our squad times don't overlap at most stations. So when one shift comes on, technically, boom, our shift starts, and we may or may not have a briefing depending on how active it is. But most nights we'll get a briefing in. And I would start bringing these things in, and I would have a briefing about sleep hygiene and meditation and things that I was trying at home and that I thought were working. I gave everybody Kevin Gilmartin's book, Dr. Kevin Gilmartin's book, and we went through that book with the squad I was on at the time, and talked about high intensity interval training, all these things, or like I was like struggling to lose weight, stuff like that, flexibility. And so if someone would come to my squad and they, expect briefings on officer safety or things that happened that night or the night before, or tactics and strategies or policy, and we would do those too, but they might end up in their first briefing with me talking about yoga, or like, hey, give this a shot. And, I was putting my neck out there, but even the old salty guys who would roll their eyes at me in the briefing itself, so often 2-3 weeks later, they would come up to me and pull me aside in private and be like, hey, I tried that. That really helped. Thank you. Or, what'd you say about meditation again? How do I start that? Where should I get some instruction? So there was an obvious interest, and I was like, okay, I'm not the only one who's dealing with this stuff. And I was getting deeper into it. I was listening to podcasts. I have that history in radio that I talked about. So the kind of podcasting appealed to me in general. And this idea that I could get interesting people on to help me solve my problem really kind of stuck in me for a long time. And I thought, I can read a book, but I'd so much rather talk to the author and ask specific questions, like, how does it relate to me as a police officer or as a deputy sheriff? How does it relate to me as a father, as a husband, And so I decided to give it a try, and kept it super quiet for a long time because I was embarrassed about, again, putting that stuff out there, and I didn't want people at work to like form their own beliefs about me. But lo and behold, it worked, and these conversations have helped me. They've helped my deputies and people at my department who've come up to me again and said, hey, I listened to episode 96 and man, that was really helpful. That got me through something. Or I tried meditation, or I tried this or that. So that's been great. And, I've been able to expand that just from the squad of 5 to 10 deputies that I work with to people all over the world now with this. And it's become a passion project for sure, because, you know, it's awesome to get that notice or that pat on the back from someone you work with that you're able to help them. But when you get an email from, say, Australia or New Zealand or Canada, you know, people you've never met, have no connection to you, but they hear what you're talking about on the show, talk about meaning. Wow, that brings a lot of meaning.
Yeah, how cool is it that not only are you helping the people that you're with day in and day out, you're helping yourself, but you have this far-reaching impact across not just the country, but like you said, internationally. You've got people in Australia. So I think podcasting and you doing that and thinking of that 6 years ago was, you know, just really, you know, very forward thinking of you. So I commend you for that. And
Thank you.
and you stuck with it, because I can say now that I've done this for a few months, when you work full time and you have a family, it's not easy to put out a podcast.
It's a surprising amount of work. Yeah. You know, even with some of the advances that have come out in the last 2 years, it's still a lot of work. I'm not gonna lie, there are definitely times where I thought the podcast was over and it was done. And there are times where I've had to take a 3-4 month break, you know. And there were times where I had enough episodes recorded to kind of get me through that gap where I just kind of walked away from it, but episodes kept coming out. And there were other times where nothing came out for 4 months, you know. And I find that I have needed those times, and I have to, just like all of us, still have to juggle all the other have to do's or should do's. But it's a weird hobby slash, I don't know if you want to call it side hustle slash passion. You know, I don't golf. I don't watch football. I read business books and I talk with interesting people on the internet. I guess that's my hobby.
Yeah, you and I sound a lot alike, by the way. So when I kind of really quickly, I've listened to a lot of your episodes, but I haven't listened to them all. So before we started talking, I jotted down just a few of the ones that stuck out that were my favorites. And I was going to ask you this question. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but well, let me go through this list for people who are listening who may not have listened to your podcast yet. But you have a sleep expert on the podcast early on. You talk a lot about, like you alluded to, CrossFit, the physical aspect and link between wellness, mental, emotional, and physical wellness, the idea of being a tactical athlete. You talked to Dr. Joel Fay from WCPR, which I'm very familiar with, heart health, financial health. You had Dave Grossman, Dr. Gil Martin, Richard Gerling. You talk about, you've got guests that talk about suicide, trauma, substance abuse, and the list really goes on. You cover the gamut of all things that I think are so relevant for first responders to hear. So do you have a favorite episode, or is it really hard to, and I can ask that a different way too, like, is there maybe, if someone is just going to start listening, should they start at the beginning, or is there one episode in particular you would refer them to?
I'll answer both questions, but
Okay.
you know, because I get asked what's my favorite episode sometimes, and I guess the best answer is each episode is like your children. You love them all equally, but for different reasons, right? And so
That's a good answer.
Because my goal, even when I've had someone like Kirk Parsley on twice, who's the sleep expert, or Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann, who's a friend who's been on twice, like even if they're on a second time, I try to always have a slightly different conversation or a much different conversation with them. So I do feel like each story is its own, I was gonna say journey, but I don't think that's not the right word, but each one has something that I really get out of it, you know, and in a different way. And so we could go through all 140 whatever episodes, and I could tell you what I got out of that episode. So each one I really get something out of. So I don't really have a favorite. The other answer to that question would probably be the one I just had, because I'm always like fired up about the conversation I just had, and just, you know, kind of, I noticed that every time I hit stop on that record button, it's like I'd gone for a run. I have that runner's high of just feeling great and feeling like, okay, we're doing the work. People are doing the work. The person I talk to is out there doing their part, you know? So I love that part of it. And then, for someone who's diving in, the very first episode, is an introduction to me and also my background a little bit more in depth, but also like what I'm dealing with at that time. And I've had a lot of people tell me that they just started episode 1 and worked their way through. And the goal, especially early on, was I was going to document my journey, and I was going to be the guinea pig, and I was just going to be upfront and honest about everything so that I could try and find the best path forward. And my friend Trey Verboom, who's been on 13 or 14 episodes, was originally going to be my co-host. And he's an amazing guy, but he's sort of a mix between a CrossFit coach and, I hate the word life coach, but life coach. Just a guy my same age who's very much a great friend and but has a different perspective than me. Anyway, we were going to kind of navigate this together, talk about things as they came up, try these different things, and I was going to report back about what worked or what didn't work for me. And that's how the show really went for quite a long time. And I still use that idea when I'm talking to guests, or I use my own experience, or, if I've tried something or if I've tried the guest's program or their product, I talk about if it worked or not. And, but I think probably episode 1, which I cringe listen to now because, you just 6 years of improvements, but the story behind that, I think, is probably what people gravitate towards, and they can understand where I was at, and then it's not a straight line up from there. It's a peaks and valleys kind of exploration, as it is for everybody. But yeah, I'd probably say start at episode 1 and just see if that connects with you.
Yeah, I think what's neat is that, because I've listened to your earlier episodes, you talk very openly and honestly about your own struggles and journeys and what you wanted to accomplish. And I mean, let's face it, cops can see through the BS. And so if you're not open and honest about what you're going through, people are, probably wouldn't be listening. And so I think that's why your message is so effective and resonates with people.
Well, that's I'm glad to hear that, because you're right. If I've learned repeatedly that on episodes where I have to really push myself to be as honest as I know I need to be, or, vulnerable, for lack of a better term, those are always, and this includes actually the emails I write to my email group. If I'm writing something that's really challenging for me to hit send on, that's a good sign that I'm in the right space. And as challenging as it often is to hit publish or hit send on those emails or episodes, it's always those times when I'm the most open and honest that I get the most feedback back of someone saying, thank God, I thought I was the only person, or I thought I was the only one, or I didn't know how to say it, but that's exactly what I'm feeling like. So that always helps me make sure that I'm staying on the right path too.
Yeah. I mean, I know exactly what you're talking about, because if you have that nervous kind of apprehensive feeling about something because it's something that's kind of scary, I mean, then sometimes that's just your body's way of saying, okay, this is what you need to be doing, even though it doesn't seem like it in the moment.
Well, and too, like, we're taught you're the command presence, right? Like,
Yeah.
Don't betray any emotion. Don't betray any sense that you don't know what you're doing. Handle business. And we, again, that leaks from trying to break up a fight, and the command presence needed to break up a fight or handle a DV suspect. That translates into how we interact with each other, translates into how we interact with our families and our kids. And I didn't know this at the time, right? It took me all this to figure this out, that we have to be able to drop that armor. When you take that body armor off every day, you got to take off the armor that's around your heart too. And I know that that's going to sound weird to some people, but I think other people will get it, that we armor ourselves up for the day, but we also have to make sure we de-armor at the end of the day.
No, that's very well said. Very well said. We need more people like you, I think, to talk about things like that, especially for the guys listening. I mean, I can say it and there's like, she's a girl. She's got emotions and feelings and things like that, which, whatever. But I think it's important for more people to speak openly and honestly about that. Another person that comes to mind, he talks a lot about the heart-centered approach, is Dan Willis. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He wrote Bulletproof Spirit. He was on a few episodes ago. So it doesn't sound crazy to me. I think more people need to hear that.
I did a video talking about vulnerable moments. I did a video for Instagram recently where I talked about how, right in the middle of the Chauvin trial, a verdict, and then the other shooting in Minneapolis, and like how we really need to work hard to maintain an open heart. And it's really easy for us, especially in this environment right now where we're being attacked from all sides and it feels like there's no safe haven for us. It really is a challenge, even for me, to make sure that my heart, I don't know how else to describe it, but my heart stays open to this idea that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, both our profession and our community. And we have to work at that. Otherwise, we're going to close down. And we do a really good job as cops closing down, putting on the armor, locking the doors, securing ourselves in place. And if we do that, we're going to end up with the suicides and the heart attacks and the cancers and the divorces and all the high risk behavior that comes with it.
Right. I mean, I would be preaching to the choir to tell you this, but yeah, I mean, even though that might be what we want to do, if we continue to do that over time, it's not going to serve us well. It's going to eventually come out in some way, and it may not be the way we want it to.
I guarantee to anybody listening that if you're dealing with something, I say this, you're dealing with it whether you're dealing with it or not. If you're aware and cultivating awareness about the challenges that you're confronting, awesome, good for you. It's a long journey, but it's worth it, right? If you think you don't have problems, if you've been in this job for any amount of time and you don't think you have something in your work history or something in your past that is causing problems in some way in your life, you're not paying close enough attention. I really believe that. I think everybody has something. And for some people who have a high level of resilience, it may be very minor, but it's there. Or they have a high level of resilience, but then we get lackadaisical about it. Resilience is a perishable skill, I think. And we all have to maintain our efforts to, maintain our self-awareness and do self-evaluations constantly to make sure that we're not letting something slide or mislabeling something that really is us processing stress or trauma poorly.
Yeah, great advice. And let me ask you this. So that's what would you say to someone, or maybe to your 16-year younger self, or to somebody just starting out in the career field? What would you suggest that they do from day one going into this career field to help train that resilience? Because like you said, resilience is a perishable skill, so that they can get through this career and not just get through it and make it and survive it, but to thrive and to live healthfully, retire healthfully. I know that's a very layered question, but if you had a piece of advice for somebody just starting out, what would it be?
There's so many ways you could go at, because there's so much. Let me start over. There's so many things that can happen to you in this career that if you wait for them to happen and then try to untangle it, what a mess,
Yeah.
And it's a journey that's worth it, but it is a journey. The one thing I think that comes to mind for someone new, if someone were starting right now, is have whatever you want to call it, but have a coach or have someone on the outside of the job that is going to be around. And if that person leaves for whatever reason, make sure there's a backup. That could be a friend. It could be like my friend Traver, for example. It could be a pastor. It could be a therapist. It could be, a former high school coach of yours, whatever it is. Like, have someone to give you some balance and maintain those relationships with people outside of work so that you have someone who could speak honestly with you. That's probably the ideal but that's also very challenging, right? There's a lot of challenges in building a relationship like that. What I'm encouraged by is I see the younger generation is much more open to these ideas and much more accepting, and assumes that their health and wellness in all forms, mental, physical, emotional, is more important than the job. And it is. We've got this beaten into us that the job comes first, and we leave it all on the table for the job, but look where that's gotten us, right? And this new generation is much more open to the ideas of meditation and yoga and therapy, or those sorts of things that they could use. The other thing I would say, this was a huge trip up for me, was the importance of physical movement and exercise. It's so easy to let that go. I got into the job, I got through FTO, and then boom, my first kid was born. I was on night shift, and stuff starts to slide. When I look back, right at that moment, I can tell you that that's where stuff started to slide for me, because I started to deprioritize a lot of things, and like around physical fitness and taking care of myself. And my ideas became, take care of the department. I'm new. I want to make sure that I impress upon people that I'm, worthy of being here. Take care of my young daughter, take care of my wife who just had a baby. I'm on night shift. So this idea of taking care of yourself went out the window pretty quick, because, we're busy serving others, and we have to make sure that we serve ourselves as well. Take your time for physical movement, take your time to journal, or just work on your own stillness. Take your time for those things that give you value outside of the job, your hobbies. Keep those things and fight like hell for them, because if they go away, then you're in trouble.
And I think too, what happens, because all of those things that you just mentioned, I've been there, done that. And my husband and I were both in our careers when we had our family and our crazy schedules. And it's really easy to let that go. I've been there myself. And I think one thing I wish I would have known when I was going through that I try to impart upon others, is you don't have to work out for an hour a day. You don't have to meditate for 30 minutes. Maybe just do some small thing every day for yourself, just for you. Small incremental change, just implementing these habits and then build them on one another, because I kind of equate it to like a New Year's resolution. I don't know about you, but I've never been very successful in a New Year's resolution. It may have, worked good for a month or so, but so that's one thing that I try to tell people when they are in the thick of it, because it can be difficult to find those larger periods of time to do that. But I think if you just grab a little bit of time and do something just for you, that's going to help your resilience. I think that goes such a long way. So that's, really good advice for somebody.
And I want to jump into, if I can, we often think that coming home and grabbing a beer or grabbing a whiskey and going into the room by ourselves for 20 minutes is doing something for ourselves. No, it's not. Yes, it's a decompression, and you might need that time, but there are, and I do that. Like, I'm not preaching, because I still have a pattern of coming home, grabbing the beer, going out to the patio and kind of sitting by myself. But I'm aware of it, and I try to break it more often these days. But when you say doing something for yourself, I think a lot of us are going to be like, well, yeah, I come home and I have a Jack and Coke, and then, I feel pretty good and I'm back with the family. Like, no, let's do something that pushes you one step forward, whether it's, like you said, 20 minutes of reading or movement, or, journaling, or walking with the family, or walking the dog, or whatever it is, but something to off gas that stress of the day. That helps, again, take that armor off.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying, because that is what I meant. And I'm with you too. I'm not saying we shouldn't have a drink now and then, but yeah, thank you for clarifying that. So just shifting gears a little bit, because I want to make sure that people know how to find you. I'm sure if they're familiar with your podcast, they already know how to find you. But I went and did just a little exploration on your website, and I noticed that besides, writing blogs, and you've written some articles for PoliceOne and some other law enforcement websites, You also do speaking. You have other services that you offer. Can you share a little bit about that if you're willing to, and tell people what they can, how else they can hear you?
Sure. With all the COVID and everything, all of those grand plans came to a screeching halt for a while. So we're just starting to come out of that. So I'm excited to get out there. Yeah, I mean, people can find my work at thesquadroom.net. I'm on social media at the Squad Room. My TED Talk is on YouTube. And, what I've found in doing the show for the last 6 years and having the 140 some hours of conversation with experts in these variety of fields is that regardless of where you are, whether you're, in South Carolina or Australia or Ontario or San Francisco, like we all have a shared experience that we're seeking to understand and put meaning to. And so, coming into the next year, what my two passions are officer wellness and officer leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to be doing a lot more with frontline leaders and frontline supervisors and helping them navigate those challenging first couple of years of being a new supervisor. When I got promoted, I got a slap on the back and just was told, take care of your people and you'll be fine. Like, well, what does that mean? So there's so much into that. There's so much goes into being a good frontline leader. So we'll be doing a lot of that stuff. And then really diving deep with groups of officers on some of these issues that we're facing and having more face-to-face events and engagements and building, we've already built out, a strong program that people are going to be able to join that works on kind of a cohort model where officers from around the world can get together and we work on these things together, And so very excited about some of the stuff that's coming up for us. Yeah. And that'll all be at thesquadroom.net.
Excellent. And you brought up your TED Talk. Can you really briefly tell everyone, I know we can find it on YouTube, but can you just tell everybody what that's about? Because I did watch that recently and I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So in 2018, January 2018, we had a massive, they call debris flow here in my area. And it's hard to describe. It's not, I guess that's the right word, although it sounds so formulaic, but it wasn't a mudslide. It wasn't a rock slide. It was an everything slide. Basically, the entire mountains came down on Montecito, an area, and killed 22 people, took out hundreds of homes, left massive 2-story boulder size holes in others. And so the TED Talk is about my experience working in the aftermath of that. And what I learned working with the community. We had an amazing thing happened where the community, it's hard to describe to people without the photos, but we're talking like shoulder depth mud down the street.
Wow.
People's houses covered in mud up to the second floor, yeah, like I said, massive boulders ripped off half of houses, the stuff like that. That's what we're dealing with. And the community came out with some shovels and some buckets and they started digging. And so it's my story of seeing that, being annoyed with it at first, but then understanding how important this relationship between the first responders, us, right, and who I call the second responders really is, the people who step up in any day, the everyday heroes that do their part, and why and how people can be that in their community regardless of where they are.
Well, I will make sure to include that link in this podcast so people can check it out and find it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a fun thing to do.
So we didn't really get to this. I meant to ask you this in the beginning, but as we wrap up, I want people to understand that you've talked a lot about your current role as a sergeant, supervisor, but you've actually got quite a bit of experience in different areas with your agency. And, I talk about that in the intro, but if you don't mind maybe telling us what what areas of your agency you've worked in and what has been your favorite assignment.
So like most, I started in patrol, and then went to, my agency was set up that after 2 years you go to court service, what we call court services, but either you're a bailiff, and I did that for a very short period of time before I got promoted to a community resource job where I worked with one of our contract cities and was sort of the community oriented policing liaison. I did all the neighborhood watch programs. I did ABC enforcement, and then I wasn't there long before they gave me gang enforcement too. And so I worked with our countywide gang team in that capacity for about 3 years. Did a lot with city councils and elected officials and stuff like that. So it was weird. I was like half gang cop, half like political liaison. It was a cool job.
That is kind of unique.
Yeah. So, budget cuts, what are you going to do? They gave me both, but it was great because I always wanted to work on gangs. It was one of my interests and one of my passion projects. So from there, I decided after some time doing that, I wanted to go back to patrol, and ended up being it was one of those squads where we all have like, you're working with your best friends, and did that for some time, and then got promoted to sergeant, and stayed on patrol. And I stayed on patrol as a sergeant for quite a while. And lucky thing about a sheriff's office, I can you can move around stations, and so you can try different things. And it's like going to a new city, basically sometimes. Did that. Then I took over our forensics department for a short period. In the interim for all this, I was also on our media relations team. I would fill in as PIO, often, did a couple other the little like subcommittee things. So then after forensics, I took over our professional standards unit as the supervisor, better known as internal affairs. And that's where I've been for the past couple of years.
So what job haven't you done with your agency? Wow, you've done a lot in 16 years.
It's funny you say that because, that inner critic is always like, you haven't done enough.
Oh, yeah.
So I have, and I need to, again, one of my things, got to work on acknowledging that, yes, you have. Narcotics was always an interesting thing to me and always something I wanted to do early on. Now at 44, like the speed at which they work, that tempo, is probably not conducive to me. I know that now, or at least it's not anymore. Maybe it was when I was in my late 20s. But narcotics was always of interest to me. The other one that I've always tried to get into, and it's just so competitive, is an air unit. I love helicopters and I love flying. We have a very active air unit. And the whole time that I was, quote unquote, a slick sleeve, there were no openings. And of course, the minute I get promoted to sergeant, another guy moves on, another guy retires, and boom, all of a sudden there's openings. And as much persuading and PowerPoint presentations as I could do as to why they needed another sergeant in there, it wasn't persuasive to my sheriff. And so it's just one of those, like, I have to wait for, for them to either put a new sergeant in that spot or, maybe a lieutenant spot or something like that. I don't know. Those are really like the only ones that I feel like I wanted to do that, maybe I missed. But it's, another thing, I know we're wrapping up, but something else maybe for people to understand is, so, and I think this is what leads to a lot of angst and trauma for some cops, is like, so much of your career is not in your control, and we need to be okay with that. Like, just what you go to on a daily basis, that's easy for people to understand, right? You don't know what kind of 911 calls are going to come out. You don't know what kind of crazy is going to kick off that day. So you can't control those things. And of course, that's the impetus of anxiety for a lot of people, because we don't know what's going to happen and we're out of control. We are not in a control position. But like you touched on, the stress of our coworkers is far more impactful sometimes than the stress we feel on the streets. And we can't control who might get promoted ahead of us, or we can't control that, someone did better on an interview than you did and they got the position and you didn't. And that door closed to you for your career and you took a different path. As I said, from SRO to SWAT, there's so many positions that every career is different, and your career may not work out how you envisioned it. But you're still bringing value, and there's still value and meaning and purpose in what you're doing regardless. And tap into that. Other people have the exact career they want, and that's just how it works. It's really bizarre, but we need to give ourselves some grace if our career is, quote unquote, not what we wanted, or not what we expected. But you can expect other things from yourself too.
Well, and I think that goes with anything in life. I mean, we can only control what's kind of in our lane. I heard this recently at a peer support training, like what's in our donut hole. I know that's a bad analogy because we're cops, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. So yeah, right. I mean, I think we spend a lot of time concerning ourselves or worrying about what other people are doing or not doing, and just trying. And I'm guilty of this too. Sometimes I have to remind myself of this daily, but I've gotten better. Is like you just got to control what's in your donut hole or in your lane, and really try hard not to concern yourself with the other things.
Yeah, easier said than done, but absolutely correct.
Yes. Well, Garrett, thank you so much for your time. I could talk to you for another hour, and maybe we can do that again. I don't know if I can convince you to come back on, but I really appreciate your time. And thank you, really, really thank you for everything that you're doing for law enforcement and first responders. It's been so great to talk to you, and I really look forward to continuing to listen to your podcasts and follow you on social media, because you put out a lot of good stuff on there too. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, I'd be happy to join you again. Enjoyed the conversation and the chance to explore some of these ideas. So thank you for what you do too. I think the more voices and the more angles we approach this at, that, we will all solve this together.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Garrett. If you're interested in checking out his website or his podcast, go to thesquadroom.net. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider sharing it with someone who you think would enjoy it. Give us a review, and if you'd like to be notified of future episodes and want to receive our future newsletter, you can subscribe on our Podbean website.